Oh, this last part before lunch is to focus on the Black Swan Research Initiative and where we are with that. And it is very much focused on this idea of MRD that we were talking about. The idea, if you get down to this kind of a break point, this MRD negative, where you have a negative result when you're looking for 1 out of 1 million cells, how predictive is that? And do you have security, for example, that you would be happy to stop the maintenance? And so we need reliable testing to guide us about maintenance. We also need reliable testing to see if we're doing a good job up front. For this discussion, you'll see I brought my colleagues, the Swans, and you see they're just right now resting out in the bay there. You know, they're very happy out there. The key part about this particular project is that we are focused on finding a cure. And that may seem like a simple comment, but actually most of the trials that we do are comparing one treatment versus another. And so the one that has been mentioned quite a bit, the one which I did, I compared VRD, the triple, versus the double. And so you find out if one therapy is better than another. But those kinds of trials are not focused on, okay, well, what do you need to do to keep working at it to get down to this 0 at the 1 in a million level? It's a different kind of trial that you need to use to focus on that as a goal. And so in this search to try to approach this problem, it has been in 3 phases so far. So that this is a project that started back in 2012, and you can see here it's in 3-year phases. And so each phase has focused on a part of the problem to allow us to move forward in an efficient way. And so in the first phase, as Rafat was just touching on, we had to bring together methods that would allow us to measure MRD, identify and develop precise MRD testing. And so for this, there are 2 major methods. One is a molecular method, which is called NGS, Next Generation Sequencing, where you look for that specific sequence that is coming from the myeloma. And the other one is NGF, and this is a method where you put the myeloma bone marrow through the flow cytometer, and the myeloma cells are detected based upon what are the antigens on the surface of the myeloma. So this is an immune technique looking at the surface of the myeloma. And both of those methods are now working and sensitive at this 1 in a million level. And so the first step was for us to identify and make sure that those testings were being used and implemented in trials all around the world, which they have been since we started working and drawing attention to this. The next thing that had to be done was to have response criteria which included that. And so you need to have response criteria where you go beyond complete remission. And as I mentioned, complete remission is the standard approach where you actually look at the bone marrow, see if there are any myeloma cells there. Using these sensitive methods, you can go beyond that. And so we brought the myeloma working group together and have published criteria that include this next level or next more sensitive endpoint, which includes MRD negative or MRD positive in the bone marrow using this NGS, the sequencing, or the flow method. But what is most important to show is the value. So if you get that negative at the 1 in a million level, how much difference does it make? And so obviously what has become clear is that it makes a big difference. At that 10 to the minus 6, those patients do much better, both in terms of their remission and their survival. In phase 2, we moved into kind of a next level where we tried to solve this problem of the long follow-up. We were just talking about if you're negative taking a maintenance Revlimid, it'll take many years for us to figure out if it's safe to stop. You need many years of follow-up. So we decided that what could be good would be to look at patients who had been on therapy for 10 or even 20 years, and if any of those had samples that had been stored in the freezer, then we would be able to actually study using old data, so looking at long-term surviving patients so that we didn't need to wait, we could study it right now. In the phase number 1, we were looking at testing. In phase number 2, we were trying to study by not wasting a lot of time on looking at what we call retrospective analysis, but we moved into the idea of starting therapy to try to cure myeloma. So what's listed at the bottom here is to start cure trials. And so the main approach to see what is possible to achieve a cure is to use the very best therapy that we have right now and to start as early as possible. And so if we might have the capability to cure some patients with myeloma, the best chance of doing that would be to use our best therapy and start early. And then the next step would be to look at what is left, and so the second strategy would be to come up with therapy that would get rid of any resistant cells which are remaining. And so this is the fundamental 1-2 approach of the Black Swan project. So we were very pleased at the ASH meeting, which was held in December, that Dr. Mary V. Mateos from the University of Salamanca in Spain, she presented the results of her CESAR trial. And this was a trial in high-risk smoldering myeloma. And this is a trial in which patients with smoldering myeloma, high-risk smoldering, were treated with the triplet, Kyprolis, Revlimid, and Dex, and they also received an autologous stem cell transplant. And so she reported, and this is a pilot study of 90 patients, and so she reported that there were 62% of those patients achieved this MRD negative at the 1 in a million level. And so this is kind of a landmark where we can see that if you start early and give the therapy your best shot, that this is something that could give you a 62% negative, which is tremendous. Now, this is at the end of about a year or so, and so the key next step is, will those MRD negatives hold? Will we get some relapses over time? So actually, as of now, there haven't been any relapses. There have been some progressions in patients. So obviously, if 62% are negative, that means that 38% are positive. So that there are some patients that have not achieved a negative status, and a couple of those have progressed. But this gives you a landmark where 62% here, and we can see how we can improve this part, but it gives a focus for the Black Swan Initiative is that we need to study and understand the patients who have persistent positive or maybe turn negative and then become positive with some relapse over time. And so the many Black Swan projects that are going on in different centers all around the world are focused on trying to study the MRD positive cells, to study, well, why is it that some of these cells have resisted the treatment with KRD and transplant or therapies like this? And at the immune level, at the genetic level, and in terms of drug sensitivity, gene expression profiling, all different kind of ways to look at the residual cells with the idea that if we can understand them and study them, then we could come up with some of the new therapies that would be able to get rid of those cells. And this is just to give you an idea of the scope of this Black Swan project. It has become an incredibly popular project, which is tremendous news for all of you, is that investigators all around the world have really picked up the baton on this and said, okay, well, we are very keen to study different aspects of the disease. And in Iceland, I'm going to show you a video in a little bit as to what's happening in Iceland. In Germany, we were very fortunate to work with Dr. Jens Hillengass, who has actually recently moved to work with Dr. McCarthy at Roswell Park. But in Germany, he was studying the residual disease in terms of imaging using MRI and PET scanning, so that we could see, even if the bone marrow was negative, maybe we could pick up some disease on a PET scan or an MRI. We've been working closely actually with the group in Australia, and they are the ones who found out that during active myeloma, DNA spills out into the blood, and you can see how much DNA is in the blood, and you can also study the mutations which are in the DNA in the blood. In Spain, this has been the main group that's been working to achieve MRD negative, and this is where the first cure trial was initiated. And then here in the US, of course, we are pleased that finally, we're going to be starting this month the ASCENT trial, which is the cure trial in the US for high-risk smoldering myeloma, which is the KRD plus daratumumab, and we're hopeful that this will be opening within the next 2 or 3 weeks at a number of centers all across the US. And so just to summarize, these are the different places that right now have been the most active in contributing to this Black Swan research initiative with different kinds of projects. There are multiple projects actually at each of those sites, and even some other sites in different countries. One of the areas that we're focused on right now is that if there are minimal residual disease cells, if there are cells which are left over, they many times will have mutations, but one way to attack those is by attacking using antibodies or immune cells that are basically oblivious to the molecular changes in the nucleus. So if they can attack the surface of the cell, they can get rid of the cells, whether they might have molecular changes that could confer some degree of resistance. And so we're especially interested in looking at the CD38, and so this is added into the cure cocktail. But now for residual disease, we're looking at the BCMA on the surface of the myeloma, B cell maturation antibody, and this can be attacked using also monoclonal antibodies, and there are several of those, simple ones and some that are called bispecific that have two areas of attack, and also using the T cells. And several companies, actually multiple companies, are conducting trials at many sites looking at the CAR T cells. So those are the therapies that are attractive to consider to get rid of any cells which might be left. And as I mentioned earlier today, it is interesting to see how the new gene editing techniques can be used to ramp up the immune cells. So you can tweak the CAR T cells. So T cells normally are checked from attacking the myeloma because of the interaction between these checkpoint inhibitors, PD-L1 and PD-1. This is a blockage to the activity of the T cell from attacking the myeloma. What you can do is that you can actually, using the gene editing technique, you can actually get rid of this PD-1, which is triggering the blockage of the T cell. And so then the T cell can attack the myeloma. And so this is a very clever technique to activate the T cells so that they can be fired up to attack the myeloma. And you can modify more than one gene. I've just given you one example here. And so this is something that's exciting, and this has actually started as a trial at the University of Pennsylvania with Dr. Stadmeyer and Dr. Carl June, who is one of the genetic engineering people who've been involved with the development of this. So I think that by achieving MRD negative in a substantial percentage of patients, and then focusing on how we can achieve the kind of cleanup with the next phase, we're really pleased that we're moving forward to get the very, very best results with this Black Swan research initiative. And so people say, well, when is the cure coming? And people say, well, oh, I'll believe in the cure when elephants fly. And so I was very pleased recently to notice that this little guy here is, I do believe he's starting to fly. And so I think we got to be very close. And so what I'd like to do is to use the video that we've made about Iceland to kind of illustrate some of the more detailed aspects of the work that we're doing for Black Swan. Through the CURE trials, we are really testing the different regimens that might do the best job with the drugs that we have. So KRD in Spain, KRD plus DARA in the US. We're actually using KRD also in Iceland. One interesting thing that we're doing in Iceland is that we're giving KRD to the patients with smoldering myeloma, and we're also giving KRD to the patients who actually have active myeloma. And so one of the cool things, besides the country, is that in Iceland, is that we'll be able to compare what is the exact value of starting that little bit earlier with the exact same regimen. So each different project allows us to learn and refine our understanding of what we're trying to achieve. So if we can show the Iceland video, you'll see what is especially cool about working in Iceland.
The iStop trial is a nationwide study. We want to answer the question whether screening for MGUS or smoldering myeloma leads to an improvement in overall survival. We are going to answer that by inviting all Icelanders 40 years and older to participate. There are about 148,000 people, and then follow them for 5 to 7 years to see if this translates into an improvement in survival. Those that are diagnosed with MGUS or smoldering will enter a randomized clinical trial with 3 different arms with different approaches with regards to workup and follow-up strategy.
The significance to this is that as we've been treating myeloma over the past 20, 30 years, we've realized that the best outcomes are when you start early. We have really good treatment for myeloma now, which produce deep responses. We would have a clear opportunity to offer a treatment early and achieve really excellent outcome. This has never ever been done before. This is unique. This is a unique project. It's the largest project ever in myeloma where you have engaged with the patients, where the patients have really signed up and are agreeing to be tested and then potentially to be treated. This is an enormous achievement.
The study was launched in November 2016. The first year was basically about setting it all up, getting the people to work, designing the protocol, and most importantly, getting this participation.
Close to 80,000 people have signed up for the project, and of those, already over 30,000 blood samples have been forwarded to testing.
To date, we have received over 30,000 samples, and at points we've been receiving up to 300 samples a day to be run with the free light assay and serum electrophoresis.
Those results are coming back to the Iceland clinics. The teams are now going out to meet with the patients, discuss with the patients, and do the testing, including bone marrow testing and special x-rays to evaluate and start to monitor these patients.
We are seeing like 40 patients every week with newly diagnosed MGUS and myeloma, and this will continue during the 2nd and 3rd year.
It's tremendously exciting to see that the patients are being evaluated using the testing for myeloma cells in the peripheral blood, in the blood system, versus the bone marrow. And so I think that this will be an important step for the future, where if the results are as good as we think, it will become feasible after you have the baseline information to make decisions based upon the levels and changes that occur with the myeloma cells in the blood.
What we see now already with the preliminary data is that the risk categorization, according to the Mayo model, we see that we have more low-risk MGUS than has been described before and less high-risk MGUS. And also we see that smoldering myeloma seems to be a little bit more common than we thought, based on the first patients that we have analyzed.
This potentially makes the project more valuable than we thought, where a higher fraction or percentage of patients are turning up who are indeed at this level where the early intervention can be safely offered and can potentially contribute to a much improved outcome. Beside this sense of community and engagement of the people here in Iceland, we have this DECODE facility, a genetics facility that's been in operation now for over 20 years. They have this huge biobank of DNA from the people of Iceland. If someone has a myeloma protein, we immediately know which type of patients, which type of DNA is correlated with the development of a monoclonal spike, with early disease, with smoldering disease, with active myeloma.
In the second year, we'll probably be able to analyze and present the prevalence of smoldering myeloma in the general population, in the screened population. Probably we'll be able to identify new germline variants that are associated with MGUS and myeloma. And also we're working on the quality of life, which is associated with MGUS and the knowledge of having MGUS. This is just the beginning what we are seeing now. We will have in the future many more opportunities to do lots of exciting things.
They are accumulating all the data that we will need to really look at who's at risk for myeloma, what stage they're in. Iceland is really a stepping stone that will take us to the next level of looking for the cure for multiple myeloma.